Welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era. This week's show is all about Barnsley Football Club in a return to our all-time Premier League table countdown. 49th place, it is Barnsley. They had one season in the Premier League, one season in the top flight in their entire history as we record this in 1997-98. We're going to deep dive into that in quite a lot of detail. We're going to look at some of the near misses they've had since in terms of getting back there. And we are also going to cover the century-old scandal of how they perhaps should have made their top flight debut in 1919. That did not happen. If you don't know that story, we'll have more on that very shortly. We'll be putting a Barnsley FC 11 into the top flight archives, and we'll be asking the same question we do to fans of all clubs. Is life in the Premier League all that? Is life outside of the Premier League actually much better? Find out what my guests think very shortly. There's also a return for Play Your Apps Right, which is back this week. Another entertaining round of that. Our game, our trademark game that lots of people seem to enjoy. And we'll be putting a Premier League Austrian into the Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame. Find out who we think, at least, is the greatest Austrian to have played in the Premier League era. As ever, if you are new here, please do hit subscribe on YouTube, on wherever you get your podcasts, so that you never miss a show. I really appreciate it. Helps me grow the show as well, and pass the pod to anyone who you think might be interested in this as well. There's something in this, obviously, for Barnsley fans, but as ever, it is all about the football and the memories and the nostalgia. So hopefully something for everyone. It doesn't matter who you support. You really don't need to be a Barnsley fan to enjoy this show. So let's get into it then. We've already done 50th in our all-time Premier League table countdown. Now it's the turn of 49th. Barnsley Football Club with Pete Selwood and Ian Wilkinson. Enjoy. Joining me today to discuss Barnsley FC's solitary season in the top flight and the 30 years that surround it is award-winning comedian Pete Selwood and the editor and founder of a Barnsley fan website currently in its 15th season, onthepontien.com. It's Ian Wilkinson. Welcome, gents. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to start with you, Pete. How long have you been a Barnsley fan? Can you remember your first visit to Oakwell?
Yeah, I think I can. But I remember the first game that I actually enjoyed, which was probably in about 98. Then before that, I remember my dad taking me in 96 when I was 6 or 7. I didn't really get it. And it's almost like, I remember when I was 9, it clocked in my head if you follow the ball, this is really interesting. But when you're 6 or 7, you're just taking in everything. You're taking in the bloke in front of you, smoking a cigar, you know what I mean? It's just, yeah, so I can't remember the specific. I think it was Bournemouth.
Smoking a cigar in the stands, that immediately carbon dates the story, doesn't it? What about you, Ian? Where does your Barnsley history take us back to?
Probably to the black and white era where people were smoking pipes in the stands. I think my first game was probably back in the mid-70s, probably about 76, and it might have been a game in the old 4th Division against Hereford or Newport County. Either or. I do remember one interesting fact, which was on the way out of the house, my dad checked my coat pockets for toilet rolls. That's in the era where apparently when you scored, you threw a whole toilet roll onto the pitch. But, me completely confused, thinking, don't they have any toilet facilities at Oakwell, Dad, I was very fortunate. I used to go quite regularly with both my dad, my uncle, my grandfather. And my great-grandfather was alive, and we all used to stand in the old West Stand back in the day. So about 45 years, at a guess.
I love how in the modern era of football you get checked for sharp objects as you go in, whereas back then you got checked for Andrex. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be fair, in that West Stand, you probably actually do need to bring your own toilet
probably
roll.
would have been.
The toilet is literally a wall.
In 49th place on our all-time Premier League table, it is Barnsley. Football didn't begin in 1992, though. However, although much like our 50th place team Swindon, things don't get much better when factoring in the century or so before. This is also Barnsley's only top-flight season in their history too, with them placing 62nd of the 65 teams in the all-time top-flight table, above Swindon, Leyton Orient and Glossop North End, but just behind Darwin, Carlisle and Northampton Town. Pete, before their promotion to the top flight, Barnsley's one major honour was winning the FA Cup in the same year the Titanic went down. Just how huge was it for the town to reach the Premier League?
I think it was massive, and obviously, like, there's quite a few documentaries about it, and obviously, when you've got the narrative, obviously, the strikes as well beforehand, that kind of, particularly when you look at, like, before the strikes, like, the amount of people who were going to the matches, and then you look at it during, obviously, people then have to make decisions, and then they stop going, and then once you stop going to something, it's very easy to then continue to stop going to something. Get into the Premier League, or even getting within a sniff of it, it makes a big difference to, and it's not just in the meantime, it's then generational as well, because then parents will start bringing their kids again and stuff like that. And obviously, it's just after that level of hooliganism that kind of football got known for. And then around the start of the 90s, it kind of switches to suddenly, we can actually go to this as a family thing. And I think it's made a huge difference to us. And it also means that we get to moan about it quite a lot, which is something that we quite enjoy, to be honest, because we're still going on about 2 games nearly 30 years on. And I think we just like a good moan in general, so it's been good for the club in general.
just to moan about it. Barnsley might not have had to wait quite so long for their first top flight season had it not been for a suspiciously southern influenced vote of the league members. Back in 1919, at the resumption of the league calendar following the First World War, a conflict many promising young footballers had given their lives in, the top flight was increased from 20 teams to 22. Had it been as simple as promoting the top 4 instead of the top 2 from the league below, Barnsley would have been in the top flight. Instead, a vote was held among members for who the 2 teams would be, given promotion and relegation had been disrupted. Chelsea were unanimously spared relegation on account of Manchester United being found guilty of fixing a game against Liverpool that sent them down. The remaining relegated team, Spurs, and the teams finishing below the 2 promoted sides in the division below were in the running for the final spot. In the end, 5th placed Arsenal won the vote with 18 and were elected into the division ahead of relegated Spurs with 9 votes and Barnsley with just 5. Spurs were back up within a season, but Barnsley would have to wait just under 80 years. Ian, simple question. Would promotion in 1919 have seen the Reds progress to a period of dominance unlike any the English game has ever seen?
It's debatable. Would we now be playing in Wembley of the North rather than our frequent visits to Wembley of Oakwell South? But I think in terms of Sir Henry Norris, the fact that he was an MP of a rotten borough and chairman of Arsenal, Woolwich says everything really. Would we have had the likes of Arsene Wenger at Oakwell and Dennis Bergkamp? Who knows? But historically, the teams that were there in the 20s and the 30s are still there now in the Premier League. So maybe we've got a shout about that.
Yeah, and it is seen as a big injustice. Obviously, football was a relatively young sport at this time. That vote, it does sort of stink of corruption that meant that perhaps the smaller northern team versus the rather large southern team were disadvantaged. So
absolutely. And I think the surprising thing is, and speaking not necessarily as a Barnsley fan at the moment, is that in that same election process, Tottenham had a fair shout to say, well, if Chelsea is staying up, we finished above them, we should remain in the league. They were actually relegated. And I wonder, in the whole Tottenham and Arsenal story, whether or not that actually began the whole process of that rivalry. Tottenham had a shout to remain there if Chelsea were remaining there. But as it happened, Arsenal leapfrogged us and we remained in the old second division.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's well remembered in North London as well as South Yorkshire. That incident over 100 years later. So let's start in 1996-97. Barnsley start the season among the bookies' favourites for relegation to the 3rd tier. Instead, they start the season with 5 consecutive wins to top the table. I actually spoke to Danny Wilson on an earlier episode of this programme and about when he felt promotion was a possibility. And he said, after they walked off the pitch on the opening day at West Brom, Pete, that's some confidence. Barnsley feeling realistic to be promoted to the Premier League. Can you remember when that sort of felt like, oh, this might actually happen?
Probably when it happened. Like the moment. Like, I don't. It's very easy for him to say, after the first game, but it's easy to say in hindsight, isn't it? I don't think, because you just don't expect it to have happened to you, do you? It's like when people win like big holidays, like on the, you just don't expect it to happen to you ever. So when it does, you always think something's going to go wrong. And obviously, like Mark McGee, he famously, I think the line was pretty much people don't want to see Barnsley in the Premier League. And we've always had that. We have got a chip on our shoulder about it. So when it comes to like, when do you think this is going to happen? I never think it's going to happen. We can be at a playoff final winning 2-0. And I can't, Like, I can't imagine supporting a big team. Do you know if you go like 2-0 up and then you go, oh, I can pop the kettle on? That must be an amazing feeling to have, because I never have that. If we're 2-0 up, my immediate reaction is, don't concede the next goal. Whereas some teams just expect to win, and we just never do. We never expect to win any game. So
the eternal pessimism of the football fan there. I mean, he sort of spoke about it to kind of say that, they've been building this team in pre-season, because I think it was the beginning of his first full season in charge, wasn't it? He basically just felt that the team were firing on all cylinders. They're in among the top few teams all season. Barnsley topped the table at Christmas after a 1-0 win at Bramall Lane. Fast forward into their final home game of the season, a 2-0 win against Bradford City at Oakwell seals automatic promotion into the top flight, as chants of "it's just like watching Brazil" ring around the stadium. Ian, were you among the 18,000 there who witnessed it that day, and what did it feel like?
Well, the honest answer is, unfortunately, I wasn't there. I was working at the time on a Saturday. And I sometimes liken it to something Graham Nash once said about Woodstock, which is he said that if everybody that claims to have been there actually was there, the earth would have tilted. And yeah. I think there's a lot of that in Barnsley. Everybody attended that particular game. Probably Pete's younger brother did as well, who probably haven't been born yet. But
yeah.
It really is a little bit like that. But there was this, not necessarily an expectation. I don't think anybody expected that we'd get automatically promoted, even though I think 5 or 6 games to go. I think we had a 4-point advantage in a game in hand. I think when we finally got there, it was disbelief, really, not necessarily joy. And I suppose it only spilled over when people finally got back into town and started having a drink. I did manage to get in town that afternoon. There were people climbing lampposts and all sorts of things taking place. It was unbelievable, but almost to the point where you could not believe it. You still had to wait for that first day of the Premier League to start to actually realise that Barnsley had actually made it.
And were you working in a job where you could kind of sneakily have the commentary on? Like, were you when did you find out? Can you remember that moment?
Yeah, at the time I was actually selling TVs and videos in a shop at the time. I actually sold Chris Kamara's first Sky TV setup. So if it wasn't for me, Kamara wouldn't have had a career. Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate. How people used to collect round TV shops on a Saturday afternoon while I was in the middle of it all with 40 screens around me. So yeah, it was fantastic. But as I say, don't think everybody that said that they attended were really there. But it was a fantastic occasion for the town. The celebrations were superb. But again, I still go back to the point that I don't think anybody believed it until that first game happened in the Premier League.
The summer of 1997 was a busy one for Danny Wilson as he prepared his side for survival in the season ahead. Lars Laser, pronounced Laser, but I didn't know that, by the way. This is Ian McMillan told me this. Apparently, I've been calling him Lars Lees for a quarter of a century.
Oh, mate, once one person says it, that's it, and we just refuse.
That's it. Done.
I mean, Mohamed Salah it's Salah. It is, and we just go no, and then we just go, oh, isn't Paul Merson funny because he refuses to learn African players' name? What a hoot! Say no to discrimination whenever you see it, etc.
But in that spirit, Lars Laser. Anyway, he joins in June. He's followed by Georgi Hristov for a club record 1.5 million, which remarkably still stands today, I believe. South African international Eric Tinkler arrives from Cagliari and is followed by Alice Creason from Maribor. Former Chelsea wingback Darren Barnard joins from Bristol City for 750k a few days before the season is due to kick off. Paul Wilkinson, the man who'd got the scoring underway on that famous day at Oakwell, is the only player to leave for a fee, joining Millwall in September for 150k. Pete, Danny's clearly trusting the core of the squad that won promotion here while trying to add a bit of quality across the squad as well. Again, these signings, do you remember feeling excited about them? I guess they're largely unknown. Maybe Darren Barnard might have been known to the fan at that time. Did it seem like enough quality coming in?
I think it's always what's different to now is when you sign someone from Cagliari, for example. You can go on YouTube and find out about this player. You can even contact Cagliari fans who might speak English and say, "What do you think about this?" Literally, at that time, when you sign a player from abroad, you've not a clue until the first game. You watch them in friendlies, and that's quite exciting, isn't it? Really, because you don't know what you're going to get. I remember, I loved Darren Barnard because I was left-footed, and I absolutely loved him for his entire career, even during that penalty miss that I'm sure that will come up later. But again, like you see so many teams that go to the Premier League now and they change their entire side and it just doesn't work. Like Fulham did it a few years ago and it was just a disaster. I think you've got to keep the core there and then just add a few little sprinklings. And I think we kept adding throughout the season. An interesting ploy, in my opinion, because you keep seeing there's this documentary where he goes, "Oh, I thought what we just need another striker and we'll do a bit better." And I'm like, we're losing 6-0 every fucking week, mate. Maybe that's not the problem, is it?
Well, it's definitely part of the problem, but it's not it's not the whole problem.
I think people will pretend now because it didn't work, but I think Hristov signing was exciting in the moment. It was exciting, and then because it didn't turn out well, people go, "Oh, he was always going to be rubbish." But like, he also didn't endear himself to the fans. He said Barnsley women were ugly quite early on. But it is ridiculous. I'd be interested to see how many teams have actually how long their record transfer has lasted. Because I don't think many teams will have lasted that long with a record transfer still being in 1998.
Yeah, that is a remarkable record when you think how inflated the fees are.
Yeah,
because it's literally 10 times that now, isn't it, in modern football? Those fees. Although I'm not whether the 2023 version of Georgi Hristov would have cost 15 million is quite frightening. But I mean, you've just referenced it there though, Pete. Before we get to the football, let's cover the cultural settlement period of one Georgi Hristov in South Yorkshire. There are variations on this story, including an attempt by Chairman John Dennis to play the incident down by claiming an interview with a Macedonian freelance journalist had created the controversy. But here are the highlights. When asked how life in South Yorkshire was, Georgi passed comment on local girls not being as pretty as back home and that they drank a lot, something he was not keen on. To counter this, he was asked to judge a Miss Barnsley competition broadcast live on GMTV. I can't find footage of this. I would absolutely love it if someone can.
Oh, mate.
It ended with him dating the winner for 3 months, despite apparently having a fiancée back home. It all ended when she told the Daily Mirror that he kissed another girl in a nightclub. Commenting at the time on the incident, local woman Sarah Scoley, this is not the lady we went out with, said, "It's not on. There are pretty women in Barnsley. He is sad he wants to get a life. I would give him a good slap." She added, "There are some ugly women, but it's not right to be saying it."
For a bloke who finds the women quite unattractive, he doesn't have to get about, does he?
Well,
maybe that's like just negging. He's done an article to neg all the women of Barnsley into wanting to get with him.
Yeah, just to prove him wrong. I mean, Hristov would score just 4 Premier League goals in 11 starts and 12 sub appearances, with a particularly lengthy spell on the bench, coinciding with that blossoming relationship with the recently crowned Miss Barnsley. Now, obviously, we're not in the business of objectifying women of Barnsley in 2023, but this was back page headline stuff for a short time. Ian, does the prominence of this story indicate where Barnsley now were in the eyes of the nation now they were Premier League? That actually this, because had they been in the First Division, would this story have been nearly as big as it was now they were in the Premier League?
I think the obvious answer is probably not. But I think this was another opportunity, as we sometimes feel in Barnsley, for Barnsley to be laughed at. I think we're always the butt of people's jokes. I mean, that there's probably an existing image that people are still walking around with flat caps, walking their whippets, making their way back to their chimney-stacked homes, and it just isn't that at all. I think it was a bit of fun, and I think it probably went a little bit over the top. I think Georgie came off worse, to be honest, because I think Georgie at the time, would he have been, 20, 22, 23?
Yeah, he was young, wasn't he? Like,
I think there's been, as I say, opportunities where, there should be some positive press about Barnsley, but they'll always go for the soft underbelly. Even on local TV, if they're doing an item on Barnsley, they'll always get somebody unintelligible when they're being interviewed. They will always get that lunatic from the street to represent the town.
The day when Brexit went through, they went, "Let's go and get the opinion of the people in the north," right? And they interviewed a bloke who basically was a full-on bigot. Like, he was saying he wanted Brexit because of he didn't want Muslims in the country, which didn't make sense. Now, and everyone will then go, "Oh, that's what the north thinks. Fair enough." But when they interviewed him, right? If you actually look at the footage and Barnsley well, That man is outside of Wetherspoons at 10 in the morning. Right?
He's already been there an hour.
Representing us. And they've clearly gone, let's go stand outside the Wetherspoons and ask people having a fag outside, what do you think about it? Because they're chasing that story. Whenever they do it in Stocksbridge and they want to show the crippled north, they never go to the nice little bit at the bottom, which is a new, like, lovely shopping centre that's been done in the next 10 years. No, they go to the shop that isn't open, that's run down, and stand there and go, the north is bleak, isn't it?
I think that was always the what people felt, that Georgie was maybe made the scapegoat of this story, and I think that's certainly what John Dennis felt as well. So, okay, well, let's get to the opening day when Harry Redknapp's West Ham United came to town. Oakwell was awash with samba drums in the sunshine in a carnival atmosphere that could just about be seen from space when Neil Redfern scored in the 9th minute. It was a lead the Tykes would take into the break before John Hartson equalised. Do either of you remember which future Premier League great and slightly less great manager on current evidence would score the winner with practically his first few touches?
It's Lampard, isn't it?
It is Lampard.
Yeah,
Frank Lampard scored that day. Pete, it was clearly a wake-up call of the step up in quality, right? What do you remember about that day of just the pure excitement of it, going in the lead, but obviously eventually losing 2-1?
I think I was 7, so I think basically we just did it in our house. But I remember my dad going, and I remember it being like quite a big deal, and talking to my granddad about it, and it being quite a big thing. But then again, you talk about the step up in quality. They're two players now that, if you're into football, you know those players. They're good, solid footballers, like terrible managers, but good, solid footballers. And like, you know, John Hartson is like, you know, we've never had a player probably of either of those levels ever, probably, apart from, like, you could argue John Stones, but, you know, that's in his infancy, you know. So it's probably quite a wake up call as well. And obviously to losing when you've been winning is the worst one. So I imagine at the end of it there was this kind of reality check almost immediately.
Yeah, and I think if you go back and see the highlights of that game, when Barnsley go 1-0 up, it's absolutely incredible. Again, I think it's just the dreams kind of continuing immediately where it left off from the Bradford game the previous summer.
Often happens, doesn't it, with the promoted teams? Like, I think like Leeds give like Liverpool a run for the money, but then, and you always remember that first goal, don't you? But you never remember that the bigger team eventually does win. But you remember the first half and the excitement of it, you know.
I mean, after a first win on the road against fellow promoted side Crystal Palace, with Neil Redfern again popping up with the winner, there would be a first televised game at Oakwell against Chelsea. Now, I actually have a memory to share about this. I didn't have Sky TV back in the 90s. I remember checking this result on teletext at my nana's about 5 o'clock that Sunday afternoon. I've got some family from Barnsley. I've got a little bit of a soft spot for them. I saw it was 3-0. And thinking, well, that's not too bad, without realising it was a 4 p.m. kickoff, not a 3 p.m. kickoff, so it was actually only half-time. Gianluca Vialli would add a further 3 goals in the second half to add to his goal in the first to see the Blues run out 6-0 winners. Ian, this is the first Tonkin that Barnsley get. Obviously, it won't be the last. Is there a sense that this is something they're going to have to get used to in the top flight, coming up against these better sides?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is yes. You know, in terms of what we were up against, we were up against teams that were stacked with established international players. And I think, having spoken with Eric Winstanley, who was assistant to Danny Wilson, there was always a feeling coming into that particular year that although we had a nucleus of some young talent coming through our own club, and we'd complemented that with some established professionals, some of our signings were probably a little bit desperate coming into that season. So we knew we were probably going to get stretched by the better sides. You know, Everton beat us 4-2. Even Wimbledon beat us 4-1. And that's before we even get to the Man U 7-0 drubbing. We knew that this was going to happen, but against maybe those sides that would normally sit in the middle of the table or possibly at the lower end of it, I always felt we had a fighting chance. And we started to demonstrate that from Christmas onwards. So although we probably had expected it, it didn't actually happen that often after Christmas. So we start to acclimatise to the league, and I think we started to show that we probably deserved a place there.
Absolutely, yeah. And well, Hristov and Tinkler seal a second 3 points at Oakwell a few days later against Bolton to leave Barnsley in the top half of the fledgling table at the end of August, above the likes of Liverpool and Yorkshire rivals Leeds and Sheffield Wednesday for a bit. Then comes a run of defeats that include conceding 4 at Wimbledon, 5 at Arsenal, 7 at Manchester United. A third win of the season comes against Coventry at Oakwell, but it's the fourth win at Anfield by 1-0 that really grabs the headlines. New recruit Ashley Ward, signed for £1.3 million from Derby, scores in both games, including that crucial winner against Liverpool. Pete, there's been a real reliance on Redfern for goals in the early months, but Ashley Ward, he brings in that bit of top flight experience to the party, doesn't he? What a win at Anfield as well, and maybe that's a little bit more of what Barnsley need, that little bit of Premier League now, so that they begin to bring in as the season goes on.
Yeah, it seems like we do it so gradually that it's almost like too little too late. You feel like if you had that squad at the start of the season, it might have been a bit different. I mean, Ashley Ward he scored goals everywhere pretty much, didn't he? I think we sold him for like $4.5 million or something to Blackburn. For anyone who's listening, YouTube the goal, because it's one of the worst goals of all time. It's like Patrick Berger tries to control it in the middle of his own box and just kicks it towards his own goal. It's horrible. It's a really horrible goal, but the kind of goal that I now enjoy. 30-yard raspers I'm not into anymore. Really bad defending is what I'm into. I remember Ashley Ward signing being a big deal. I think he was the kind of player that everyone got on the back of the shirts as well. Like instantly, that was the player he wanted. It was like a well-known player, and obviously he's gone on to Real Housewives of Cheshire. So
everyone putting him on the back of the shirt. I mean, you still had to pay by the letter in those days, didn't you? So it was double whammy. Yeah. It was only the 4 letters. So Barnsley are bottom at Christmas. Rarely a positive omen, but the festive period appears to be the moment they acclimatise to their surroundings. Between Boxing Day and the 14th of March, they pick up 17 points from 10 games. Coupled with the arrival of Jan Åge Fjørtoft in January, another goal scorer with Premier League nous, it's enough to lift them from the basement of the table to 18th and touching distance of safety. Alongside this positive period of form comes an unlikely FA Cup run that sees them beat Bolton at Oakwell for a second time, defeat relegation rivals Spurs after a replay, and then earn a replay at Old Trafford in a game they are unfortunate not to win. The replay becomes a night that will go down in Oakwell folklore. Ian, tell me about the night Scott Jones scored one of the most memorable braces in Barnsley's history.
Quite a performance, really. Local lad, came through our academy. Scott actually only made 83 appearances for Barnsley in I think 6 years. So clearly didn't have a major career at Barnsley, but it would be fair to say he didn't have a major career anywhere else afterwards. So it really was, the game of his career, I would imagine. To even be 1-0 up and then 2-0 up against Man United when Jones scored his first goal, which again, for those that are listening, do watch it on YouTube, because I think Schmeichel, did not expect, Barnsley defender to be able to lurch into the penalty area and kind of shoot it into the corner in front of him. Schmeichel was furious with defenders on that particular occasion. But then to get pinned back to 2-1 and then for him to go up for the header, Scott Jones, it was just magical, really. As I say, it was probably the game of his life, probably the game of his career. But Scott Jones, like many other players in that Barnsley side, could produce performances like that in a Barnsley shirt, but could never do it anywhere else. To beat Man United in the FA Cup, especially to a side that had already thrashed us 7-0 earlier in the season, it was completely magical. To go out against Newcastle then was really disappointing.
So the cup run does end at eventual losing finalist Newcastle. It comes in the middle of a 3-match winning streak that will see the Tykes win at Villa and defeat Wimbledon and Southampton at Oakwell, the latter in a 4-3 ding-dong, where goals from Ward, Fjørtoft, Redfern and the briefly prolific Scott Jones seal all 3 points. Then comes the visit of Liverpool, where Barnsley's proud record of not having a single player sent off all season comes to a somewhat abrupt end. They finish the game with 8 men on an afternoon where Gary Willard takes the players off the pitch following a fan's attempt to remonstrate with the official at best and attack him at worst. The perpetrator is rugby tackled by Fjørtoft. Pete, I spoke to Danny Wilson about this and he was very gracious, all considered, simply saying it wouldn't be a day Mr. Willard would want to remember. He says that even Liverpool manager Roy Evans said he couldn't believe what he was seeing either, and that the referee lost the plot and that there was no need to take the players off. Again, this is all on YouTube. It's a remarkable watch. What are your memories of the game and reflections on it now?
I just remember, obviously, because I was so young, but I remember everyone around me being so angry about it. when you concede goals, there's a different level of anger. It's like it's an instant. It's quite a raw emotion. Whereas when you feel like you are being cheated, it's a very different way that you express the anger, and you almost go into yourselves, and you always feel like this only happens to us. This would only happen to us in that situation. And when both managers come out and say that was silly, you know something's ridiculous, isn't it? Like, because Roy Evans doesn't need to do that. He could easily have gone, fair enough, because everything goes his way. So it's easy for them managers who normally come out and go, no, I agree with all that, to then go out and go, actually, no, I think that was ridiculous. Says a lot about it. And like, again, it's just so annoying because we're on such a upward trajectory as well, and we'd already beaten them. So there's almost this bit in your head where you go, we could have beaten them again because you've already beaten them. And I just remember the anger being very much like, and we have got the chip on the shoulder that the world is against us. And I think we always had the concept of no one wants us here.
Yeah.
We aren't welcome at this party. And then when there was a chance that we were going to continue to be at the party, this happens. It sticks in the mind, whether it's coincidence, which probably is coincidence, but you can't help but feel that way, I think.
Pete, I think we all felt we deserved at least a draw out of that. And I think the sickening thing was that there were so many other situations in the game where Willard could have given, set plays or even another penalty to Barnsley for a handball that occurred.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't happening. And you just feel as though we're not the big boys. The big boys are going to get all the decisions today. And I think what really galled us was the disciplinary points that you pick up. The fact that we were then going into those final 9 games. 3 players that were going to be on an instant ban. It was absolutely sickening.
Yeah, of course, Barnsley come out and equalise 2-1 down when the players are taken off. Come out and equalise with 9 men. But it is, I think it's a McManaman goal that ends it, and there's another sending off at the end. The Liverpool defeat is a cruel blow, but it's not quite lights out. An Easter weekend win over Sheffield Wednesday keeps them in touch. The following Saturday they lead 1-0 at half time against Christian Gross's Spurs in a 6-pointer. With 3.5 games left in the season, they are effectively out of the relegation zone on the live league table for the first time since September, if they can just hang on. They don't. 2 minutes into the second half, Colin Calderwood equalises to rescue a point for Spurs. It will be the last one that Barnsley pick up. While they're undoubtedly much more competitive in the second half of the season, they do pick up an unfortunate habit that's sort of the opposite of Fergie time. In the final 3 months, they concede late goals at Leeds, Newcastle, Coventry and Blackburn to mean precious points become narrow defeats and extinguish the momentum of the previous weeks. 2 of those defeats come in the games immediately after the infamous Liverpool game. Ian, the final table will show Barnsley 5 points behind Everton in 17th, 9 points behind Spurs in 14th. In reality, it was a lot closer than that, wasn't it?
I think so. We just needed to pick up probably another handful of points from what was 27 remaining. There's some really close games in that. You look at the Blackburn game, it was 2-1. The Leeds game, 2-1. Newcastle 2-1. Leicester 1-0. It just ran away with us in the end. I think heads dropped. There were clearly personnel changes towards the end of the season. But I think on record as well, it was probably one of the highest points tallies you'd need for survival ever in Premier League history.
Yeah.
So we haven't shamed ourselves. The likes of, your Derbys of the world going down on just 20 points, or Huddersfield with 22, or Sunderland 21.
Sunderland, yeah.
We really did make a great stab of it. But we were so close. In the end, even Eric Winstanley reckoned that, coming into those final games, we thought we'd done just enough. But clearly, it was to run away with us in the end, and it was a massive shame.
Barnsley are relegated and return to what might be considered their natural home after just one season. That's not me throwing shade, by the way. Barnsley are the most successful second-tier side in English football, having played 3,289 games at that level. For context, that's more than 700 games, or approximately 18 seasons more than their closest challengers at that level, Leicester and Birmingham. Danny Wilson leaves for Sheffield Wednesday. It's a kick for Barnsley fans who've come to adore their messiah, but it's a chance for Danny to stay in the Premier League with a club he made his name at as a player. I mean, both of you really, let's start with you, Pete. Can you blame him? Did you blame him at the time? Obviously, it's going to your local rivals, but it is a club that he's known at, and, he's performed minor miracles at Barnsley. What were your thoughts, Pete?
I think the answer is both. When you're young, you see anything like that as the ultimate betrayal, and you are a traitor. And then you get older and go, probably more money, doesn't have to move house. Kids are probably in school. You know what I mean? You get older and you kind of accept it a bit more. But when you're younger, you just can't believe it. And also, I think we acted like he'd had no connections to Sheffield Wednesday. That was the thing. We acted like he was only about Barnsley and stuff like that. Whereas obviously he had so many connections there, and it's literally, so where I live, I'm pretty equidistant between Hillsborough and Oakwell. So like like, you know, you don't have to move. Your kids can stay in school. I get it, and you staying in the Premier League. Obviously, it didn't go well for him. So, you know, that's tonic. But at the time, but then you get older and you go, oh, fair enough. We had a similar thing with Heckingbottom going to Leeds, and you know, it just happens. I mean, in Yorkshire, people don't like moving. You look at Dean Windas's career.
Yeah.
He stays near where he wants to be, you know. So yeah, it hurts, but you go, well, you've got to understand it. I think if you don't understand it, you're not human.
Yeah, I can see you nodding along, Ian. What were your thoughts?
Well, exactly, really what Pete said. I mean, we tend to be quite partisan, especially when it comes to issues concerning Sheff Wednesday. So whether it been Danny Wilson or Viv Anderson making that move to Wednesday, you know, it really was a case of anyone but. You know, he had chances to go, I think, to Everton and West Brom. I think we'd have probably said, well, fair enough, you know, we can understand that one.
Well, if it was Everton, you'd be like, well, fair enough then.
Yeah, but, you know, because it was Wednesday, although Pete said, you know, there are practical reasons behind that, and I agree with him, it's still Wednesday. You know, when we lost, Winnell to Sheff Wednesday, or, you know, you lose anyone to Sheff Wednesday, it's the fact that you're losing somebody to Wednesday. But, you know, again, with what, you know, Pete said earlier, you know, Agent Wilson went and did a job for us, which he brought Wednesday down the season after, from a position they've never regained. So, you know.
Overall, what do we think that solitary season in the top flight? What is the legacy of it? And will Barnsley ever get back there? Do you want them to?
I'm not sure if I want it. I work with a lot of Leeds fans through comedy and stuff like that. Like, they're my best mates, and like they aren't enjoying it anywhere near the level that they thought they were going to enjoy it. Because what I like about football is I like the community element of it, and I really like the routine of it, and I like playing at 3:00 on a Saturday. And in the Premier League, you don't get that. And also, what you get when you go to the Premier League is you have to deal with Twitter fans, and they're the worst people in the world. The people who've never been to a game, who say someone is washed or finished and use fire emojis, and will have a picture of Anthony Martial as their like avatar and stuff like that. And I don't want to deal with that. I want to deal with real people and just go, oh, didn't play. And also, like, when you get to Premier League, it's like every loss is like you are the worst thing in the world, and every win you're the best thing in the world. Whereas, like, I feel like when you're in the lower leagues, you can come away from a game and go, we've won that. Don't think we were that good, or we've lost it, or we go, could have done. I think we could have won that, you know. And then I think I hate all the trimmings of the Premier League, but I would like the money of the Premier League. That would be my assessment of it.
Not an uncommon thought process, you know, because obviously it's seen as a bit of the holy grail, but it's not. Football isn't always as fun up there. Do you agree with that, Ian? What are your thoughts? Would you want to see Barnsley back in the Premier League?
I'm going to be a bit more cynical. Take the money and run. Because you've got it for 3 years, and I think, you know, for a club like Barnsley to have stability in the Championship, let alone the Premier League, you know, we need that money, and I'd like to think we'd use that money wisely so that, you know, we could actually build, you know, more stability in the Championship. I do agree with Pete. The Championship's far more fun than the Premier League. You know, we don't have to deal with, at the moment, things like VAR. We don't have to deal with the likes of, you know, TV personalities having a comment on every player in a squad. It's a nice place, the Championship. We need to get back there, but I would love to get back to the Premier League. I mean, Pete, how did you feel when Ishmael nearly got us there? One goal away from being sort of level pegging with Swansea. Who knows, we could have made that final at Wembley a couple of years ago and taken on Brentford and beaten them. Would you not have wanted to get to the Premier League?
I did once we got to that stage.
Yeah.
But like the entire season was like, I remember once, I think we'd won like, we were getting towards stupid levels. We won like 6 or 7 in a row. And obviously it was during lockdown, so we were all watching it on iFollow on our telly.
Yeah.
And I was laughing. And my missus came down and said, "What are you laughing at?" And I said, "We've won again." And it's just getting a bit silly. It's just getting. I think we won 1-0. DK scored. It might have been Birmingham, something like that. And I just couldn't stop laughing about it because I was like, this is so fucking stupid.
Yeah.
And I just, because we shouldn't be anywhere near this. And we knew that the players weren't actually probably that good either. I think it would have been good to go up. And I think again, one of Swansea's goals is offside. VAR pulls it back and stuff like that. And it's more the infrastructure. I think if we got the money, we could then spend a lot more on, like, I'd like to see the fan zone turned into an actual outdoor, like, so you could have a rain cover over it, so you could have it all year, stuff like that. That's what I'd spend it on. Never mind like players and stuff like that. I'd try and make the match day experience nicer for everyone. Maybe give the people serving alcoholic drinks a bottle opener that works, for example.
I was just curious what you might think as well about. I know we've probably said at times, a bit tongue-in-cheek that we've got a bit of a chip on our shoulders, but I think a lot of things changed by getting to the Premier League. We actually thought we could be, any team really on our day. And I just wonder how much that influenced other clubs to believe that they could also make that step, because after Barnsley came the likes of Hull, Huddersfield, Blackpool,
Bradford,
Bournemouth, Brighton. These are teams that have all been languishing in the lower divisions and made that rise through to the Premier League. So I don't know, maybe we're a bit of a torchbearer for smaller clubs in general. So maybe we shouldn't have as big a chip on our shoulders there.
But the Premier League don't want teams like us still in there. I firmly believe that. And if you watch the playoff final last year, tell me that they wanted who they wanted in that division. Yeah, because Huddersfield could have had a series of penalties, and everything was about getting Nottingham Forest into Premier League.
Let's take a moment to reflect on the last 30 years for Barnsley on the whole. You've covered the Ishmael close shave more recently. There was another one. Dave Bassett came perilously close to taking the Tykes back up a few seasons after their Premier League season, but defeat to an excellent Ipswich Town side who would finish 5th a year later denied them. Would that Barnsley side have fared better? Was the club maybe in a better position then with the stadium developed, where I think obviously quite a bit of investment went? Let's start with you, Pete. Had Bassett taken them into the Premier League, would that team have fared better?
Yes. I really think so. We had a good strike partnership. We even had good players on the bench. We had Craig Ignat was scoring ridiculously from like a midfield position. Darren Barnard was very good at the time. We still had good centre backs. Like, I think Chris Morgan and stuff like that gets quite maligned, but he was really good for us and Sheffield United. We forget about that. And also, we missed a penalty in that game to go 2-0 up. And that's the turn. And obviously people don't remember that. And obviously Ipswich, I think they finished 5th the year after or something. So it was some achievement, I think that team would have done a lot better because we were battering teams like Blackburn. I think we beat them 5-1 or something. It was just a better team, and I felt like up front as well. Like your Dyers would have probably got goals in Premier League just based on the physicality of him more than anything else. And was it Shipley? Yeah, it would have been Shipley and Dyer, wouldn't it, up front? Yeah, who did do it quite well. Yeah, I think we would have done a lot better if we'd have gone up that time. But
Ian, do you agree with that? And that day at Wembley as well, where Barnsley were in the lead through, I think what was eventually credited as a Richard Wright own goal, but I think it was a Hignett shot, was it, off the crossbar?
It was, it was an absolute belter from 35 yard, hit the crossbar and hit Richard Wright at the back of the head. I was literally parallel to it, so to me it looked as though he just basically struck it straight to the net. It was only on the replay that I could see it actually bounced off the crossbar and gone in that way. I think, Pete, it was 1-1, and then we got the penalty. Which would have taken us 2-1. Now, on any other day, Darren Barnard just blasts that into the top left-hand corner. For some reason, he tries to place it, hits the post.
Yeah.
Ipswich go up the other end, score, and the game starts running away from us. Ipswich ran out convincing winners on the day, but I don't think they were significantly better than Barnsley. No. And I think had that team made that step up, wholeheartedly agree with Pete. In terms of the setup that we had at the time, Hignett was my hero. He was my era's Redfern. He was the guy that the nucleus of that team that really made the magic happen. And we had the likes of Chris Barker coming through, again another lad from our academy, went on to have a great career with Cardiff. John Curtis was a lad we had from loan from Man United. We'd have probably kept him, and I would have probably wanted to keep him, Pete. So I don't know what what your thoughts are about players like that.
He was incredible. He scored there was one where I'd never seen one live where it was a corner and you just passed it to him at the edge of the area and just put it in. I'd never seen it live, and I was like, I remember as a kid just thinking that was amazing. So I'd never seen it before. We just had, it was a better nucleus, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Higgy and John Curtis were taken to Blackburn by I think Graham Souness at the time. And don't forget, we also had the beast at Barnsley at that point, John Parkin. Coming through. I think we were developing him as a defender, and everyone else has played him up front. But we had something there that we could build around, and I think had we made it on that particular occasion, we'd have definitely stayed up.
Well, we love a stat on this show. I've been into the archives. I've looked at the last 30 seasons, taken Barnsley's league position, and worked out the average position for the last 30 years. Would either of you like to take a stab at where Barnsley would have finished over the last 30 years on average?
As in out the entire football pyramid?
The entire football league ladder, yeah.
I'd say like 40th.
What would you say?
Yeah.
Probably go a little bit higher, so I'm going to go for 32nd.
There's one season in League One that's really sticking in my mind where I'm going. That might have brought the average down.
Takes it down a bit.
Yeah.
Remarkably, Pete, you are absolutely bang on. It is 40th in the league ladder. So, and that places Barnsley 20th effectively in the Championship. So just surviving in the Championship, which the more things change, the more they stay the same.
That's what we do.
Before we move into adding a Barnsley Premier League squad into the archives, let's take a look at the all-time top-flight top scorers and appearance makers of that era. Barnsley's all-time top-flight scorer is Neil Redfern with 10 goals. £1.3 million signing Ashley Ward is next on the list with 8, while Jan Åge Fjørtoft added 6 goals in his 15 appearances. Nobody played in all 38 games, although Redfern managed 37. Nicky Eden, Adi Moses and Darren Barnard all played in 35 games. So that's Barnsley. The overall Premier League record is a solitary season where they played 38, won 10, drew 5 and lost 23, scoring 37 goals along the way but conceding 82, giving them a goal difference of giving them a goal difference.
A couple of draws,
a couple more draws, giving them a goal difference of minus 45 and a points total of 35. So, as part of our countdown for the top 50 Premier League teams of all time, we're placing an agreed starting 11 and 5 subs into the archives to represent their club for the Premier League era. The only rule is that they must have played at least one game in the Premier League for that side. Now, much like our Swindon episode, given Barnsley have only had one season in the top flight, it's a fairly easy selection process, but here goes. We've got David Watson in goal, Nicky Eden at right back, Darren Barnard at left back, Ariane Dzeu and Adi Moses in the middle, Darren Sheridan on the right, Martin Bullock on the left with Eric Tinkler and Neil Redfern in the middle, and then a strike partnership of Jan Åge Fjørtoft and Ashley Ward. The subs, Lars Laser, as we've already discovered is the correct pronunciation. Scott Jones gets an honorary place on the bench. Jovo Basancic, John Hendry, and of course, Georgi Hristov when he can tear himself away from the girls down the local miners' welfare. Happy with that squad? I mean, does that just, as I read out that squad, does that just bring nostalgia back? I mean, there's one or two players in there as well who will go on to continue in the Premier League and do all right. What are your thoughts on that team?
I was just thinking, like, what's so interesting about those like names is like when you support a big team, I don't think you get this, that like you will see those people knocking about.
Yeah.
And yet, like, they're such a part of the history and stuff like that. But I think that's why I like supporting a lower league team, because there is a good chance of me walking past Nicky Eden and not even being that starstruck. Just like, oh, there's Nicky Eden in the Asda, just because he lives here. And I quite like that. I think that's what's good about that community element to it. I mean, you look at it and go, we probably did need a couple more players there to stay up, because it's not quite good enough, is it? And that's how it ended up, I guess.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think in terms of the squad that we've named there, probably somebody that wasn't mentioned is probably Chris Morgan. Didn't have too many games for us in the Premier League. I think he probably might have just got to double figures, but he was just emerging at that particular point. And for such a young lad, it was difficult to manage. Interestingly, you tend to live near a lot of these guys that play for Barnsley. They are genuine local lads who want to play for their local team. I remember when we won the playoff final in Swansea. There were at least 4 of the players that lived on our particular estate, and without naming who it was, I think at 3 o'clock in the morning there was noise outside, and one of those players was doing some naked press-ups on the lawn just opposite me. These are things that
if I was to guess.
These are things that actually happen. It does put you in touch with your club far much more. But, you still see the likes of John Parkin down at Oak Club because they love the club. They're genuine fans. And I think for that particular reason, what you've got there is a classic Premier League team. But in all cases, they're genuine legends at the club. Genuine legends.
Yeah, even John Parkin, who's got like how many appearances? 10, something like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, the beast. I book his podcast live shows, and I just want to let you know that the first time I went to meet John Parkin, he said, "Should we go for a business meeting? We'll go for a meal." He ordered a mixed grill with 3 extra sides. So they say never meet your heroes, but that is the man in a nutshell.
Brilliant stuff.
And the co-host of a brilliant football podcast as well. So, okay,
yeah, go see their live shows.
Go see the live shows. There you go. Plug from Pete. While we've got you, lads, I need your guidance to help find the greatest player from every nation represented in the Premier League to add them to our Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame. And today it's the turn of Austria. Now, there have been 19 Austrians to represent Premier League teams since 1992 at the time of recording. Honourable mentions go to Alexander Dragovic, the 89 cap defender who played 11 games for Leicester while on loan in 17-18. Jurgen Macho, whose name is slightly more impressive than his record of just 3 clean sheets in 21 appearances for Sunderland, a record that inexplicably earned him a move to Chelsea, where he made absolutely no further Premier League appearances, and that's a little bit more explicable. Kevin Wimmer, the man Tottenham signed for 4.3 million. And later was sold by Daniel Levy for 80 million to Stoke City 2 years later somehow. Mark Hughes described Wimmer as being a real coup for the Potters, but he made just 17 appearances before several loan spells and a contract termination saw him head back to his homeland with Rapid Vienna. None of these men made our shortlist for the greatest Austrian Premier League player of all time. Instead, here are who we think are the 4 greatest Austrians to play in the Premier League. Pick who you think is the best. So we've got Alex Manninger, David Seaman's understudy at Arsenal between 1997 and 2002. In his first season at Highbury, Manninger stepped in for the England #1 to keep 6 consecutive clean sheets, earning him the Premier League Player of the Month award for March 1998, and equalling a club record that included a 1-0 win at Old Trafford. Despite making only 7 appearances in the Premier League that season, special dispensation was made for Manninger to receive a league winner's medal for his special contribution to the season, despite not reaching the required 10 appearances. Or is it Christian Fuchs, the next Austrian to collect a Premier League winner's medal in his first season with Leicester City, where he signed on a free transfer and went on to make 32 appearances in that incredible season. Described by the Leicester Mercury as not your stereotypical footballer, he has more strings to his bow than an orchestra. He is noted for his online video series No Fucks Given. He's made the 3rd most appearances of any Austrian in the league's history with 116. Or is it, just ahead of him on the appearance list, Marko Arnautovic, a man who's probably pictured when you look up the definition of mercurial frontman. Currently the 3rd top scorer in the history of his national side, he was less prolific at the beginning of his Premier League career, scoring just 5 times in his 59 appearances for Stoke, despite being described as quite a coup by manager Mark Hughes, which is clearly the kiss of death for all Austrian footballers. He did go on to bag 22 in 125 Premier League appearances for Stoke and a more prolific 21 in 59 for West Ham before moving to the Chinese Super League for £22 million. He's currently banging them in for Bologna. Or, final player on our shortlist, is it Paul Scharner, the man of 221 appearances and almost as many haircuts and positions for Wigan and West Brom. He played every single outfield position at Wigan except for left-back apparently, and retired from international football in 2006, came back in 2008, was captain in 2009 and then banned by his own FA in 2012 for criticising the coach. At West Brom, teammate James Morrison praised his performances, saying, even though he's a weirdo. High praise indeed. And he returned from Germany on loan to make a further 14 appearances for Wigan in 2013-14. A bittersweet spell which saw them win the FA Cup and be relegated. We've got Paul Scharner, we've got Christian Fuchs, we've got Alex Meninga, and we've got Marko Arnautovic. Who do you think is the greatest Austrian to play in the Premier League? Let's start with you, Pete.
Is Arnautovic having a good game? He's the classic, the cliche on his day. On his day is unplayable. Him, Kenwyn Jones, Emil Heskey, those kind of things. On his day, I love an inconsistent striker who's horrible. So it probably has to be Arnautovic. I love anyone who believes their own hype. I think he's got a swagger. He probably hates his own teammates as well, and I quite like that. I like a bit of bite in the game. So I'll probably go for Arnautovic. But that Meninga stat's really impressive, though.
Yeah,
and that means he's won a Premier League medal, so that does change things slightly. I quite like that.
Okay, so Arnautovic with Meninga not far behind for you, Pete. What about you, Ian?
I think I'm going to play a fairly straight hand, to be honest. I think with regard to Christian Fuchs, apart from the comedy surname, I just think in terms of what was achieved that season for Leicester, given that it was brought in on loan and walked out at the end of the season with a Premier League winners medal, it's a bit of a fairy tale. And, Fuchs is just funny, isn't it?
Yeah. I should have. I think it's probably more no Fuchs given. I should have gone a bit more Bo Selector. I think on the delivery of that one. Okay, so we've got a vote for Christian Fuchs. We've got a vote for Marko Arnautovic. We will put this out on Twitter for you to decide at home who you think is the greatest Austrian Premier League player of all time. But you've heard what my guests think. Yeah. Before we let you go, we're going to have a quick round of Play Your Apps Right. This is a game that we've devised on this programme. We'll start you off with a familiar former player and the number of appearances they've made in the Premier League. I'll then give you another player and you have to tell me if that player has more or fewer Premier League appearances in a higher or lower format. There are 11 players. Whoever is in charge of the board at the end is the winner. And bear in mind that if you're in charge of the board and you get the final question wrong, you pass the win to your opponent. So, for control of the board, we're starting off with number 1, Neil Redfern. How many Premier League appearances do you think Neil Redfern made? Let's start with you, Pete. Want to take a stab?
89.
Okay. Ian, what would your guess be?
110.
So, control of the board goes to Pete. It's actually 84, so very, very good guess there. 84 Premier League games for Barnsley, Charlton and Bradford. He scored 14 goals in that time. 10 of them obviously coming in the red of the Tykes. So, bearing in mind, this is Premier League appearances only. So this is via PremierLeague.com. So you have control of the board, Pete. Now you can take it from here or you can pass it over to Ian. Your end goal is to get to the end of the board as the winner. Do you want to kick us off or do you want to pass to Ian?
I'll take it. Yeah, I'm not a coward.
So, Neil Redfern, 84 appearances. Is our next player higher or lower than 84? Ashley Ward.
Higher.
You're correct. Higher. 137 appearances for Norwich, Derby, Barnsley, Bradford and Blackburn. Is our next player higher or lower than 137? Jan Argefjortoft.
Lower.
Lower is correct. 84 for Swindon, Middlesbrough and Barnsley. Our next player, Karl-Heinz Riedler.
Lower.
You're correct. Lower. 60 appearances and 11 goals for Liverpool. Unfortunately, some of those did come at Oakwell. Our next player after Karl-Heinz Riedler's 60 is Ariane Dzeu.
Oh, higher.
Higher, 146 appearances, with 27 of them coming for Barnsley before a 5-season hiatus and a return with Portsmouth and Wigan between 2003.
I'm going to lose this at the end, aren't I?
2007. You're almost halfway through. This one could be Frank Lampard, higher or lower than 146?
Higher.
It is higher.
Yeah.
600. Yeah, I like how you hesitate.
Got more goals.
he actually, yeah, I think he has higher with 609. He scored his first Premier League goal in his 16th West Ham appearance and played for them almost 150 times before 13 years at Chelsea and a short spell at Manchester City. He remains the 6th top goal scorer in Premier League history at the time of recording and is the only player in the top 20 who is a midfielder. Our next player, Dion Dublin, higher or lower than Frank Lampard's 609?
Yeah, that big injury, didn't it? I'm going to go lower.
It is lower, quite significantly lower. 312 appearances for Manchester United, Coventry and Aston Villa. He scored 111 times. You're 4 from the end, Pete. This could be a perfect run.
It's going to be heartbreaking as well as it is.
Dion Dublin's 312 appearances. Is our next player higher or lower than that? Michael Owen.
It's got to be higher.
It is higher. 326, not as significantly higher as you would think, with appearances for Liverpool,
Real Madrid, didn't he? And
but Liverpool, Manchester United, and Stoke. He scored 150 times in that period. After Michael Owen's 326, Samasi Abu.
I don't even know who that is. I'm going to go lower.
It is lower. 22 appearances for the Ivorian-born Frenchman, scoring 5 times for West Ham. 2 of them came against Barnsley, and he assisted twice in that game as well. So both of those assists came in Barnsley as well. So basically, Samasi Abu had 7 goal contributions in 22 games. 4 of them came in the same match. He'd come up against Barnsley again the following season for Ipswich at Portman Road in December 1998. Do you know what happened?
Assist on the goal?
He didn't score. They lost 2-1. I was to set you up for that one. You are 2 from the end now. A reminder, as if you needed it, that if you get it wrong on the end, Ian just walks away with the win here. Ian's got that pipe out again from his first game at Oakwell. This is remarkable to see. So, Samasi Abu's 22 appearances in the Premier League. Is our next player higher or lower? Georgi Hristov.
I think lower.
Georgi Hristov.
I think lower.
Is higher. Georgi Hristov made 23 appearances for Barnsley, almost as many as the notches on his South Yorkshire bedpost, which means that Ian,
how many starts? It's like 10.
To you, there's not many starts. Most of them, I think, were from the bench. So, Ian, it falls to you on the final player. Get this right, you snatch the victory at the end. Get it wrong, Pete takes it. Georgi Hristov made 23 Premier League appearances, but is our next player higher or lower? Danny Wilson. Premier League appearances only. Danny Wilson.
Higher.
You've gone for higher. Pete, just out of interest, what would you have gone for?
I genuinely, it would have been a punt. I couldn't have gone either way. Not sure.
Ian, you've taken the victory at the very end. It is higher. 26 appearances for Sheffield Wednesday in 92-93. He would leave the following season to become player assistant to Viv Anderson at Oakwell before taking up the hot seat himself a year later, and the rest is history. I mean, the thing I love about playing a few rounds of this game now is that it starts out very jovial and it always gets to this point where the tension is unbearable. Ian's just gone Danny Wilson, more appearances than Georgi Hristov, and away we go. So well done, gentlemen. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed chatting to you both about Barnsley. Tell us a little bit more about where people can find you online. Let's start with you, Pete. Where can people find you? We already know the John Parkin live shows.
Oh yeah, well I just book them, but go to them because I get a percentage of the ticket sales to do that. Just follow us on social media, I guess. Just follow me. I won't even tweet. Just follow me, because I need followers to, keep my agent happy. So yeah, just do that. I'll not even tweet. I'll not even bother you.
There we go, Pete Selwood. Find him online. And Ian, on thepontien.com, got anything coming up?
I haven't really been as active on it over the last sort of couple of years as probably we were at the beginning. There's a great archive online on Apple Podcasts of the Keith Hill era. if people are interested in hearing, a lot of drunk blokes sitting around talking about Barnsley during that era. But incidentally, there's a 3-part series that we did with Eric Winstanley. Eric talks about not only his career as a player and the period as coming through as a coach, but quite a lot about the Premier League era. So if people are interested in learning more about that, just look for On the Ponty End, the podcast on Apple Podcasts or your favourite podcast platform. You should hopefully find us there. And if you're making any noise on Twitter, you can find me, I think, at Wilkie. .otpe. I hardly go on Twitter anymore as On the Pontium, but I'm sure you'll find me if you're looking.
I've realised that I forgot to plug the thing that actually came on. Podcast, it's called Impaired. It's a disability podcast. Listen to it. There's a new series coming. Me and Jack Carroll, and we just talk about moaning about having disabilities and moaning about other people who we think don't have as bad disabilities as us. Yeah. Go do that.
Lads, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to relive Barnsley's season in the sun with you both. Thanks very much. So that was Barnsley, a really enjoyable show, 2 fantastic guests as ever, and just a really interesting chat of that entire period. What an era those Barnsley fans experienced, especially in that late 90s era, the promotion, being in the Premier League, very nearly getting back there under Dave Bassett. As we record this, Barnsley are flying high in League One and hopefully will make a return to the Championship very soon. Life in the Championship for Barnsley has always been pretty good. That feels like their natural home. Ian McMillan said in our second show, if you've not listened to it, that he quite likes being in the Championship and would like to maybe visit the Premier League like it's a holiday every now and again and kind of come back into the Championship, which doesn't sound too bad when you put it like that. So who knows? We may see Barnsley back in the top flight again at some point in the future. Thank you very much for all the shares and comments we had on last week's show featuring Danny Wilson. Obviously, if you're here new as a Barnsley fan, you're going to enjoy that show. There's no doubt about it. If you're a Sheffield Wednesday fan, maybe, he's pretty candid about his time there. I've had some nice messages from Sheffield Wednesday fans who maybe saw his time there in a slightly different perspective, having listened to that chat. But Danny Wilson, lovely man. That is last week's show. Please give that a listen if you are if this is your first time here and you want to find more shows. That's a great one to go to next. Just a shout out to everyone at Monk Fryston FC. I was performing there. We had a fundraiser and there was a few listeners to the podcast in the show, which was absolutely lovely, and a few new ones. There was one guy who came up to me, asked about the podcast, and I said, who do you support? He said, well, I support Barnsley. We only had one season. You won't have many episodes about us. Actually, we are quite well stocked for Barnsley. And before the season is out, I will have a chat with another player who had a spell at Barnsley. He was Player of the Year, Ashley Ward, also talking about his time at Blackburn, at Bradford, at Derby, at Norwich. A brilliant chat with Ashley Ward. That's a few weeks in the future, but please subscribe. Make sure that you get that episode because that really is a wonderful chat. A really, really lovely guy, Ashley Ward, that I recorded that a little earlier this week. And as for the gig at Monk Fryston, well, you cannot beat a lovely gig where they give you a free pint with pie and peas at the end of it. Absolute delight, the holy grail for any comic. So thank you very much indeed. And that is pretty much it for this week. Don't forget you can vote for the greatest Premier League Austrian on our Twitter channels. Find us on social media as well for clips and highlights. Next week's show is an interview with author Rob Fletcher. Rob is an author of the new football book, 1992, The Birth of Modern Football. It is released next Monday, so you can pre-order that book. My chat with Rob will be out next Monday on release day of the book. So you can literally order that book, listen to the show next Monday, and then read that fantastic book, all about 1992. It's about the Premier League, but the changes to the Champions League, the changes to the rules in football. A really, really wonderful book. I've had a little preview of it, and it's brilliant. Make sure you pre-order that, and then come back next week and listen and find out why 1992 was such an important year for football. But for now, that is it from me. Thank you again for your support. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Please leave us a review. Share it with your mates and pass the pod. I will be back next week for a chat with Rob Fletcher to find out what his deserted island matches are and to find out all about his fantastic new book. I will see you then. Thanks for listening to When Football Began Again. Join us again next time for another slice of Premier League nostalgia. In the meantime, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, find us on socials, and spread the word with all your Premier League loving mates.